When the doctor cleared his throat, I already knew something was wrong. Doctors don't do that when the news is good. They don't avoid eye contact. They don't pause like they're weighing words that can't be taken back. I was sitting in a small exam room at a private medical center just outside Santa Fe, staring at a framed print of desert hills that looked nothing like the ones outside the window. My hands were folded in my lap. Steady. Calm. Years of discipline had taught me how to sit still when everything inside wanted to move. "I'm afraid we're looking at limited time," the doctor said. Limited time. That was the phrase he chose. I was 67 years old. I had outlived friends, buried my wife, retired from a career built on reading people who lied for a living. I thought I was prepared for most things. I was wrong. He explained the diagnosis slowly, carefully. Advanced, aggressive, late detection. Weeks, not months. I nodded as if we were discussing the weather. My son arrived first. Ethan, 41, clean haircut, neutral expression. The same look he wore in board meetings and family arguments alike. Behind him came his wife, Mara. Mara was 39, always polished, always observant. She didn't rush to my side. She didn't reach for my hand. She stood near the door, arms loosely crossed, eyes fixed on the doctor. When the words were repeated, I watched her face. Not the whole thing, just the moment in between. A flicker, barely there. The corners of her mouth tightened. Not down, but up. Not a smile meant to be seen. A reflex. The kind that slips out before a person remembers who they're supposed to be. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Ethan exhaled sharply, sat down, ran a hand through his hair. He played the part well, shock mixed with concern. Mara stepped forward then, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "We'll take care of everything," she said. "You won't be alone." Her hand rested briefly on my shoulder, light, possessive. I thanked them both. I even smiled. Inside, something cold began to organize itself. They insisted I stay overnight for observation, a private room. Mara made the suggestion quickly before anyone could ask about cost. That registered. That night, after visiting hours ended, the room settled into quiet. Machines hummed. The hallway lights dimmed. I lay still, eyes closed, breathing slow. Years ago, I learned that people reveal the most when they believe they're unobserved. Mara thought I was asleep. I heard the soft click of her heels first, then her voice, low and controlled. "So that's it," she said. "Weeks." Ethan didn't answer immediately. "That's what he said," my son replied. There was a pause. Then Mara exhaled. Not in grief, not in fear, but in relief. "Good," she said. "Because we can't keep waiting." I kept my breathing even. "We'll need to move fast," she continued. "Accounts, the house, the workshop. If he starts changing things, it complicates everything." Ethan hesitated. "He's still sharp." "Not for long," she said. "And nobody questions a dying man's decisions if we guide them gently." Guide them. I felt my hand tighten under the blanket around my phone. I had turned the recorder on the moment I heard her shoes. Mara leaned closer to the bed. I could smell her perfume. Expensive, floral, precise. "All these years," she whispered, not unkindly, "sitting on all that value. I was starting to think he'd live forever." Ethan chuckled, a short sound, nervous, complicit. "Just don't mess this up," he said. They left minutes later. I stared at the ceiling long after the door closed. I wasn't angry yet. I was focused, because if there was one thing my old life had taught me, it was this. When someone shows their hand too early, they usually underestimate who's watching. And Mara had smiled. I left the hospital the next afternoon with a paper bracelet still on my wrist and a calendar suddenly full of meaning. Ethan insisted on driving me home. Mara sat in the back seat, scrolling on her phone, occasionally glancing up as if to check whether I was still breathing. The drive back through the outskirts of Santa Fe felt different now. Every storefront, every traffic light, every familiar turn carried a quiet urgency, like I was seeing the world through a narrowing frame. They were careful once we got home. Too careful. Mara cooked dinner that night. Ethan poured wine I didn't drink. They spoke softly, asked gentle questions, and kept reminding me to rest. If I didn't know better, I might have mistaken it for love, but I did know better. I watched the way Mara lingered near my office door when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way Ethan asked casually where I kept certain documents, the way they exchanged looks when they thought my hearing wasn't what it used to be. I let them believe it. The diagnosis hung over the house like a storm cloud. Word spread quickly. Calls came in from distant relatives and old colleagues. Mara took it upon herself to answer most of them, her voice sympathetic, controlled, efficient. She was already managing the narrative. That night I slept poorly, not from fear but from calculation. 3 days later my phone rang just after sunrise. The caller ID showed the clinic. The doctor sounded different this time. No hesitation, no careful phrasing. "There's been a mistake," he said. "A laboratory error. Samples mislabeled. Confirmatory tests rechecked. Scans reviewed again. I didn't have weeks. I didn't have months. I wasn't dying at all." I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed to my ear, and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not relief, not joy, clarity. "Who knows?" I asked. "Just you and me," the doctor said. "We haven't updated your family yet." "Don't," I replied. "Not yet." There was a pause, then agreement. By the time I hung up, the house was still quiet. Sunlight crept across the hardwood floors. Somewhere down the hall, Mara was asleep, dreaming of plans she thought were already in motion. I didn't tell them. Not that day. Not the next. I let them believe time was still running out. It was astonishing how quickly they relaxed. Mara stopped pretending to be careful. She spoke more freely on the phone. Ethan spent hours at the dining table with his laptop open, spreadsheets pulled up, muttering numbers under his breath. They no longer lowered their voices when they talked about the future. One afternoon I heard Mara laugh. "We'll need to repaint," she said. "Buyers hate dark walls." Buyers. That night I started paying closer attention. I left my phone in common areas more often. On purpose. Charging, recording, listening. I learned which floorboards creaked and which doors closed silently. I learned how late Mara stayed up researching real estate listings and how often Ethan checked his email after midnight. I learned that debt has a sound. It sounds like panic wrapped in confidence. Like plans made too fast and spoken too loud. Like people who believe the clock is finally on their side. I spent my days moving slowly, playing the part they expected. I asked the same questions twice, forgot small things, apologized for being tired. Meanwhile, I made quiet calls of my own. A lawyer in Albuquerque who specialized in estate planning. A financial analyst who didn't ask questions he didn't need answers to. I paid for everything personally. No paper trail they could follow. One evening, as I sat in my workshop polishing an old brass instrument I'd restored years earlier, Mara appeared in the doorway. "You should be resting," she said. "I am," I replied. "This helps me think." She smiled tightly. "You don't need to think anymore. We've got everything handled." Handled. After she left, I replayed the recording from the hospital. Her voice was clear, calm, certain, good. "Because we can't keep waiting." That sentence stayed with me. Waiting was never the problem, timing was. A few days later, Ethan made a mistake. He assumed I was asleep on the couch and answered a call right there in the living room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe differently. "I know," he whispered. "But once it's done, everything resets." Pause. "No, she won't suspect anything. She's focused on logistics now." Pause again. "We just have to hold the line a little longer." I opened my eyes after he left the room. The line. I finally understood what they were afraid of. It wasn't losing me. It was losing control, and control only exists as long as the other person doesn't realize they still have time. That night I sat at my desk and began writing things down. Names, dates, conversations, patterns. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. Because while they thought the countdown was still ticking, I was already choosing when the clock would stop. And when it did, it wouldn't be gentle. The first rule of any investigation is simple. Never act before you understand the full shape of the problem. I had learned that lesson the hard way decades ago when rushing a conclusion had nearly cost me a case. I wasn't going to repeat that mistake now, especially not with my own family. Once Mara and Ethan believed I was fading, they became careless. They argued more openly. They stopped closing doors. They stopped pretending their conversations were harmless. It started with paperwork. One afternoon, I returned to my study earlier than expected and found Ethan standing at my desk. He didn't jump when he saw me. He just smiled and held up a folder. "Looking for the warranty on the water heater," he said. The folder in his hand wasn't about plumbing. I nodded, acted confused, and shuffled past him. Later that night, I checked my files. A few documents had been moved, not taken, just repositioned. A test. Mara escalated next. She suggested I consolidate accounts to make things easier later. She offered to help me sign paperwork if my hands were tired. She even brought up power of attorney in a tone so gentle it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. By the end of the week, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Ethan had debt, not the manageable kind, the kind that grows quietly until it starts dictating decisions. Credit lines stacked on credit lines, missed payments hidden behind temporary fixes. Mara knew. Worse, she managed it. I heard her one evening on the patio, phone pressed tight to her ear. "We're close," she said. "Once it clears, everything gets reset. Just hold." Reset. That word again. I waited until the house was asleep before making my next call. The financial analyst didn't flinch when I laid out what I suspected. He didn't offer sympathy either. Just confirmation. The numbers were worse than I thought. Between personal loans, business liabilities, and obligations Ethan hadn't disclosed, they were drowning. Quietly. Desperately. The house wasn't a bonus, it was the lifeline. The following morning, I made another discovery by accident. Or rather, by design. I left my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter and went to the workshop. When I came back, Mara was holding it. "Oh," she said quickly. It was buzzing. I took it from her and thanked her. She watched my face closely, searching for a reaction. That night, I checked the access logs. She had gone through my messages. I stopped pretending after that. Not outwardly, not where they could see. But internally, the plan began to form. I met the attorney 2 days later in a glass-fronted office overlooking a dry riverbed. He listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally asking precise questions. By the end of the meeting, everything I owned was accounted for. Property, investments, personal assets. "Your son and his wife don't need to know about any of this," he said. "They won't," I replied. We began the process of restructuring. Quietly, legally, completely. The trust documents would take time. That was fine. Time was something I suddenly had again. Back at home, the atmosphere shifted. Mara grew impatient. Her kindness thinned. Ethan snapped more easily. They were counting days that no longer mattered. One evening, Mara stood in the doorway of my bedroom, arms crossed. "You look better," she said. "Almost too good." I smiled faintly. "Guess I'm stubborn." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded as if making a mental adjustment. That same night, I heard them arguing behind their bedroom door. "You said this would be faster," Ethan whispered sharply. "I said it would work," Mara replied. "Not that it would be instant. And if he changes something." "He won't," she said. "He doesn't know enough." That was the moment I knew exactly how this would end. Not with shouting. Not with confrontation. With precision. The next day, I staged my first test. I left a draft document on my desk. Something that looked official enough to raise questions but vague enough to create panic. I made sure it mentioned a transfer. Not specific, just enough. Then I waited. Mara found it within hours. The reaction was immediate. Ethan raised his voice. Mara started pacing. Papers were pulled from drawers. Phones were grabbed. That night, they came to me together. "What is this?" Mara asked, holding the paper. I squinted at it. "Oh, that. I've been thinking about legacy." Ethan swallowed. "What kind of legacy?" "The kind that lasts," I said softly. They exchanged a look. Fear. Not for me, for themselves. After they left the room, I sat alone in the dark, listening to the house settle. The walls creaked. Pipes knocked. Everything sounded louder now. They believed they were running out of time. They were right. Just not in the way they thought. And once people realize the clock might stop working for them, they start making mistakes they can't undo. Fear changes people faster than truth ever does. After the document incident, Mara stopped pretending. She still smiled, still spoke softly, but the patience was gone. Every conversation had an edge now. Every question sharpened by urgency. Ethan was worse. He hovered, watched me too closely. Ask the same questions in slightly different ways, as if repetition might reveal something new. Do you remember where you keep the originals? Which originals? You know, important ones. I never answered directly. Instead, I slowed down even more, missed steps, lost my train of thought mid-sentence, let them believe the decline had finally begun. Behind the scenes, everything accelerated. The trust paperwork moved faster than expected. Assets shifted quietly, cleanly. Ownership transferred into structures Ethan and Mara couldn't touch, couldn't contest, couldn't even see unless I allowed it. I also made another call, this one harder. A licensed investigator based out of Taos. No theatrics, no promises, just facts. Within days, I had confirmation of what instinct already knew. Ethan hadn't just mismanaged money, he had crossed lines. Small ones at first, then larger. A signature that wasn't his to sign. A guarantee made in my name without my consent. Fraud doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Mara knew about that too. I heard her one night, voice low and clipped. If this comes out, everything collapses, she said. Then we make sure it doesn't, Ethan replied. That was the moment my patience ended. 2 mornings later, a courier delivered a sealed envelope addressed to me. I let it sit unopened on the kitchen table where they could see it. Mara noticed immediately. Who's that from? She asked. I'm not sure, I said. Law firm, maybe. Her jaw tightened. That afternoon, while I sat in the living room pretending to nap, Ethan made a call. We might need to move sooner, he whispered. If he signs anything else, we're done. Move sooner. That phrase chilled me more than anything else I'd heard. I didn't confront them. I prepared. The following week, Mara arranged a meeting with a specialist, a psychiatrist. She framed it as concern. Just to make sure you're comfortable, she said. To document everything. I agreed immediately. That surprised her. The evaluation didn't go the way she expected. The doctor asked questions. I answered clearly, consistently, calmly. Memory intact, judgment sound. Mara watched from the corner, her confidence thinning with each passing minute. 2 days later, Ethan filed paperwork. Emergency conservatorship. He claimed I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. That my diagnosis had impaired my reasoning. That I was making irrational decisions that endangered my own estate. It was bold. It was desperate. And it was the final mistake. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Too quickly for them to reconsider. They assumed speed was on their side. They didn't know I had already secured medical records correcting the misdiagnosis. They didn't know every conversation had been preserved. They didn't know the trust was already complete. On the morning of the hearing, Mara avoided my eyes. Ethan couldn't stop tapping his foot. In the courtroom, their attorney spoke confidently about concern, compassion, responsibility. Then my attorney stood. The corrected medical diagnosis came first. The psychiatric evaluation followed. Then the recordings. Mara's voice echoed through the room. Clear, cold, calculating. Good, because we can't keep waiting. Ethan stared at the floor. The judge didn't. By the time it was over, the conservatorship petition was dismissed, referred, escalated, not in their favor. Outside the courtroom, Mara finally lost control. This wasn't supposed to happen, she hissed. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. They left separately. That night, back in the house that was no longer theirs in any meaningful way, I sat alone in my study. The plan had worked so far, but there was still one loose end. And it wasn't money. It was the assumption they still had leverage. People like Mara don't stop when they lose. They wait for another opening, and I knew exactly where they would try next. The day after the hearing, the house felt hollow. Mara stayed in the bedroom with the door closed. Ethan left early and came back late. They spoke to each other in short bursts, clipped and strategic like people trying to conserve oxygen. I gave them space. That was mistake number 1. When people like Mara feel cornered, they don't retreat. They redirect. It started with a letter slid under my door, carefully worded, polite, legal. A request to reopen discussions about shared responsibilities and future planning. The kind of language designed to sound reasonable to outsiders. I didn't respond. Then came the second move. Mara approached me in the kitchen one morning, eyes red, voice low. We've been under a lot of stress, she said. Things were said that shouldn't have been. I waited. You don't have to destroy us, she continued. We're family. Family. The word landed flat. That afternoon my attorney called. They're contesting occupancy, he said, claiming implied tenancy, contribution to expenses, emotional reliance. I smiled to myself. That argument only works when there's nothing else to look at. The investigator's final report arrived the next day. It was thorough. Timelines, transactions, communications, everything tied neatly together. Ethan hadn't just forged documents, he had done it more than once. Mara hadn't signed anything herself, but she had coordinated it. Covered tracks, redirected mail, managed explanations. Complicity leaves fingerprints too. I filed the eviction notice that evening. No shouting, no confrontation, just paperwork. Mara read it in silence. Ethan crumpled his copy in his fist. You can't do this, he said. We'll fight it. You already did, I replied. And you lost. That night, Mara made her last play. She waited until the house was quiet, until Ethan was out, until she thought exhaustion had softened me. She sat across from me at the dining table, hands folded, voice steady. You don't need to push this any further, she said. We can leave, quietly. No more courts, no more lawyers. I watched her closely. You keep the house, she continued. We walk away, clean. What about the forgery? I asked. She blinked. Just once. We all make mistakes under pressure. There it was. Not denial, negotiation. You'd be doing everyone a favor, she added. Including yourself. I leaned back in my chair. You misunderstand something, I said. This was never about favor. Her eyes hardened. Then what is it about? Ownership, I replied, of choices, of consequences. She stood abruptly. You think you're untouchable, she said. But you're alone. She left the room before I could answer. The following week unfolded quickly. The eviction was upheld. The fraud report was forwarded. Ethan's employer placed him on leave pending review. Mara stopped answering her phone. They packed in silence. Boxes stacked near the door. Furniture sold. Conversations reduced to logistics. On the final morning, Mara stood in the entryway, coat on, keys in hand. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not broken, just exposed. You could have let this go, she said. I nodded. You could have too. She opened the door and hesitated. You really were listening the whole time, weren't you? Yes, I said. She left without another word. The house exhaled when the door closed. I didn't feel victorious, I felt finished. That evening I walked through each room slowly. Not to inspect damage, but to reclaim space. I opened windows. Let air move again. Let silence settle without tension. The misdiagnosis had given me something rare. Not extra time. Clarity. I sat at my desk and reviewed the final documents. Everything was secure, protected, quietly irreversible. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window, watching the sun drop behind the hills. Mara had believed the story ended with possession. She was wrong. Some endings aren't loud. They're precise. And the most dangerous thing you can ever do is assume the person you're trying to outmaneuver isn't paying attention anymore. The house settled into a different rhythm once they were gone. Not quieter, cleaner. No tension humming beneath conversations. No footsteps measured for effect. Just space returning to its natural shape. Like a room finally allowed to breathe. I kept my routines. Morning coffee by the window. Short walks when the weather allowed. Evenings in the workshop, restoring things that had been neglected but not beyond repair. That work mattered to me now more than ever. People think restoration is about fixing what's broken. It isn't. It's about understanding why something failed in the first place, then deciding what deserves to be preserved. Weeks passed, then months. The fraud case moved forward without me needing to push it. Once systems like that start turning, they rarely stop on their own. Ethan called once. Left a message, said nothing of substance, just silence wrapped in regret. I didn't call back. Mara never reached out again. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how little anger I felt once everything was over. Anger requires energy, attention, investment. I had spent enough of all three on people who treated my life like a countdown. The misdiagnosis had been a mistake, a human one. But it stripped away illusions faster than any confrontation ever could. It showed me who they were when they thought there were no consequences left, and it showed me who I still was. I updated my will one final time, not out of fear but out of certainty. Everything was clear, intentions documented, no ambiguity left to exploit. On a quiet afternoon, I sat in the living room with sunlight pooling across the floor and realized something simple. I wasn't lucky to have survived a false ending. I was lucky to have witnessed the truth before a real one arrived. People often ask what I'd do differently if I could go back. The answer is nothing, because the moment Mara smiled, that reflexive, unguarded moment, told me everything I needed to know. The rest was just patience. And patience, when paired with awareness, is more powerful than confrontation will ever be. I still think about time, about how quickly people try to spend what doesn't belong to them, about how easily they assume the future is guaranteed. It isn't. But neither is betrayal unstoppable. Sometimes all it takes is one mistake, one assumption, one person who refuses to look away. I locked the front door that night and turned off the lights, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. The house was mine again. So was my life. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.